Hello, little children. This is the wonderful, always adorable Mr. Moorhead, and we're going to be learning about Stalingrad today. I'm going to try to cover this slideshow as fast as I can so it gives us more time to talk about a few other things that we need to. So if I happen to go too fast, please feel free to watch twice. But one of the interesting things in history that people tend to focus on is the biggest, the largest. You've got like the seven wonders of the world. Biggest, largest, the first, the last, like Cleopatra. She's the last pharaoh, very popular. However, if we're looking at military history and you want the biggest, Stalingrad is the biggest battle in history. Have more deaths out of Stalingrad than any other battle in history. There's several other records that Stalingrad holds, and this is the true turning point of World War II. So we're going to get into Stalingrad today, and I hope you enjoy the lesson. Now, one of the things that people really don't think about with World War II in general, they don't think of the aspect between the Soviet Union and Germany and just how much these two groups will end up hating each other and how much that will impact the war. Initially, Hitler and Stalin are going to sign something called a non-aggression pact. A non-aggression pact, to put it in 7th grade language, means I don't bother you, you don't bother me. Even when Hitler invaded the Polish corridor, you're going to see Stalin will invade a part of Poland as well and take it. So they just didn't bother one another. Now, I almost always get a very intellectual question regarding Hitler and Stalin. The question will go something like this. I've gotten it most years. Mussolini and Hitler liked each other. They're both dictators. Why do Stalin and Hitler not like each other? They're both dictators, and they both have some form of socialism in common. I think that's a very good question. I can kind of answer it. We have with communism in the Soviet Union, they use a form of socialism. Some people will debate that, but it's actually in the name Soviet Union. The abbreviation of Soviet Union is USSR, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. So remember, communism is kind of a socialism on steroids. There's some other differences in terms of like a utopia that we talked about, that eventually socialism wouldn't be needed. You would move on to something else. But at its root, communism tends to focus on class warfare. This, as Karl Marx mentioned, like the rise up of the workers and the overthrowing of the bourgeoisie, this working class. You're going to see the Nazis, while they are socialist, they seized some businesses and put them under control of the state or community. They are nationalist. The communists really aren't nationalists. The Soviet Union is made up of a lot of different people, ranging from European to Asian, ranging from like Christian to Muslim. The communists really did not care about the race, the ethnicity, religion. It was class-based. You're going to see the Nazis have this national interest, this German interest, but you also see the ethnic interest or like a racial interest that you see brought up a bunch. You've seen it talked about in other videos, and we'll talk about it in other lessons as well. So that's one of the differences that you are going to see between the two. All right, so these two do not like each other, and after the Battle of Britain, Hitler is going to attack Stalin. This is probably his worst move of World War II. Let me try to load the next one. There we go. I think it'll change soon. And if you hear, my dog has broken through the door, and he is panting everywhere, trying to get some pets on his head. So if you can hear that, I do apologize. All right, here we go. Now it's moving. There we go. It froze just a little bit. Now, initially, the Germans had a lot of fortunate moves against the Soviets. They push all the way to Moscow, so they pretty much devour the western part of Russia. There's a little bit of a stalemate within Moscow, but the Nazis are going to target something they need. The southern the southern portion of Russia, right near the Caucasus Mountains, is very, very rich oil fields, and the Nazis are going to take those. That's going to be a two-pronged benefit for the Nazis. Benefit number one, they are going to be able to rob the Soviet army of oil, much needed oil. Benefit number two, they get the oil and they need this oil as well. So that's going to be the focus, is to be able to take the oil fields from the Soviets in the southern part of Russia. All right, next. Went a little bit too far. There's going to be a change of plans. On the way to the oil fields, there is a city called Stalingrad. I have read multiple papers by military historians, and they kind of agree that, or most agree, I should say, that the city of Stalingrad in itself isn't all that important. Hitler is going to split an entire army away from the job of conquering the oil fields and is going to make that army go conquer Stalingrad. The largest reason that we can find, Stalingrad has the name Stalin in it, and it's kind of an in-your-face move. So, hey, we even captured your city, Stalin. Look how much more superior we are to you. Now, the Nazis are going to unleash this blitzkrieg, this lightning warfare, bombing and bombing and bombing and bombing. But the Soviets are going to approach this differently. Most people would have left the city. Even when the population found out, oh my gosh, here's the Nazis, they're going to bomb us, and they tried to leave, the Soviets made ordinary people stay in the city. They wouldn't let them leave. The Soviets also set a perimeter around a river at the rear of the city, and if any of the Soviets retreated, they would be killed by their own people. So the Soviets are going to kind of make this their last stand. So we have the Nazis, they blitzkrieg, they bomb this city to bits. And it actually had the opposite effect of what you would expect. I want you to think, got this kid in the lunchroom, he takes a paper bag, kind of hides down under the table where the teachers can't see. He blows up the paper bag and pops it. Everybody makes a noise, ooh, ah, what was that noise? Teachers get mad. But he can't blow that paper bag up and pop it again. Can't do it. Because when he blows the air in it, it just goes out the other side. Something similar with bombing. Once this city was bombed to a particular point, you could drop more bombs on it, didn't do anything. Because the explosion, that force out of the explosion, was able to escape. Let's say that part of the wall is knocked down, the force of the explosion would just go out that empty part where the wall used to be. So what this actually did was created millions of hiding places for the Soviet army. And when the Nazis realized, hey, the Soviets didn't give up in there, they are ordered to go into the city. Now, another one of the Nazi strength, it's speed and tanks. This city is in so much rubble, the tanks struggle to get through it. And some of the buildings are so tall, once the tanks get in there, they can't raise up the turret of the tank to be able to fire on some of the upper portions of the building. So tanks didn't help a whole bunch like they did in other battles. So nonetheless, the Nazis are slowed down and they switch from this war of speed to a war of attrition. This is the Nazis' weakness. The Soviets drag this out, and the Nazis have to fight from building to building to building. They take over one building, they go to the next, and then somebody runs back to that original building. And now they're fighting in the same place again. You will also see, if you're very interested in it, a lot of the kids that play like Xbox type war games, we'll talk about snipers or what have you. This becomes a playground for snipers because there's so many places that they can hide. One of the more famous snipers in history, Vitaly Yaitsev. He is a Soviet. feel free to Google Stalingrad and sniper, and you can read story after story about snipers within this battle. So the Nazis are facing lots of pressure. They're losing tons of people. Their losses are nearly similar to the Soviets, but the Soviets just seem to be able to generate army after army, and it begins to wear down the Nazis. One of the things that we see so many times in history, we saw this with King Charles of Sweden, we saw it with Napoleon, is that people get inside of Russia and then winter hits. And that's exactly what happens at Stalingrad. We have the Nazis that are struggling already. Winter has hit. There's several reasons why they can't get supplies dropped to them. But essentially what happens is the army is surrounded by the Soviets and the Nazi army gives up. So this is the biggest loss for the Nazis. But what makes this significant is now the Nazis are headed straight back to Germany. So the Nazis are in full retreat. We really haven't seen this up to this point of the war. We've seen them lose a battle, but they're still kind of in command of things. Here, they're actually retreating. We talked about Saratoga during the American Revolution. Stalingrad is World War II Saratoga, where the war completely changes. So the Soviets win the war. Now, one thing we don't talk about a lot, and it might be because we have a 50-plus year war with the Soviets ourselves, is if you look at the top 10 battles in World War II history, top 10 largest battles, most of them are between the Soviets and the Germans. If you look at numbers of forces dedicated to each part of the war, fighting Great Britain and the United States, the Nazis, if you're being like really generous, probably use 3 out of 10 soldiers to fight those two countries. They're going to use 7 out of 10 to fight the Soviets. The Soviets have large battles. So that is a popular question. If you check out military history, like really in-depth military history, how would the United States have fared alone against Germany? Or how would the Soviets have fared alone against Germany? So the Soviets provided a lot of manpower. The United States provided a lot of machinery and technology. And it kind of took the combination of two to defeat the Nazis. So some people wonder, would the United States have been able to win without the Soviets? And other people wonder just as much, could the Soviets have won without the United States? So those are interesting questions to ponder. Lots of stuff written about that in case you are into reading it. All right, so Stalingrad. This is where the Nazis are finally in retreat and they are defeated by the Soviets. I'm going to go ahead and post Friday's lesson. I'll post it tomorrow. After you've finished my video and you finish listening to me, there's a small video on Stalingrad. But if you get some extra time, I want you to watch Friday's video. Just watch a few minutes of it and you can finish it on Friday. This video is about the Holocaust because as the Nazis start to retreat back to Germany, this is where we see the Holocaust ramped up. And I think it's best to teach this through someone who lived there. So I'm going to show, or lived through the time, I'm going to show a video by David Bergman. David Bergman was in a concentration camp and an extermination camp. And he is a famous survivor, and he is about the age of most 7th graders when this happened. So we're not getting into as much detail on any of these subjects, from the Battle of Britain to Stalingrad to what have you. And I hate the format that I have to cover the Holocaust. It doesn't give it enough time. I wish we had far more time to study it, but do know that you will study it again in 8th grade, and hopefully we'll be back to normal and they can do it better justice than what I'm doing here. So I appreciate you guys listening, and check out that video on Stalingrad. Watch a few extra minutes of the video on the Holocaust and finish that Holocaust video up for me on Friday. Thank you guys so much, and I appreciate you. Take care. Bye.